here we are at the secondary home of Robert Anton Wilson and his wife Arlen. The primary home, as I understand it, is still Ireland, no?
Ireland will always be my home, no matter where I am.
And what we are doing here is approaching Robert on the topic of Finnegans Wake. The occasion of Joseph Campbell's death has brought to attention the fact that he came into our public world on the publishing of a skeleton's key to Finnegans Wake in 1944. And Robert Anton Wilson has been an avid scholar of Finnegans Wake and other Joyce material for how many years?
Well, let's see. I got turned on to Joyce in 47, so it's 40 years now. No, it's 41 years.
It's a long anniversary here.
Yes.
And do you have a particular interest in Finnegans Wake? Isn't that true?
Yes, Finnegans Wake is to me, I call it the good book, and I'm only half joking. To me, it's not only the greatest novel ever written, it's the greatest poem ever written, and it's the greatest detective story ever written, and the most entertaining work in all literature. And as William York Tyndall of Columbia says, it's the funniest and dirtiest book in the world. People are intimidated by it. If the publishers just had the sense to put on the cover the funniest and dirtiest book in the world, Tyndall, Columbia, would sell a lot better, and people would make the effort to decipher it.
When you first approached Finnegans Wake, did you study the skeleton key?
Yes.
And did it really help? I mean, some people have gotten and say that it's as complicated as actually studying Finnegans Wake straight.
Oh, I don't think so. You can start anyway. You can start with the skeleton key, or you can start with one of the more recent books on Finnegans Wake, like Roland McHugh's Notes to Finnegans Wake. Or you can start with Finnegans Wake itself. Or you can start with Elephant Duty comics and then try to find how many references to that there are in Finnegans Wake.
Have you ever talked with Joseph Campbell about it, or shared any of your insights about?
Well, that's a counter synchronicity. I only met Joseph Campbell once, and that was a long time ago, about almost 30 years ago. And we talked about an article I had written about Joyce called Joyce on Taoism. And he was very keen on that approach to Joyce, relating Joyce to Eastern mysticism. And so we had a very cordial talk. And then, in spite of the fact we had quite a few friends in common and a lot of common interests, I never met him again. Our paths just kept going all around in orbits around each other, but we never quite intersected again.
Well, now, would you consider your work companioning his, or developing on the basis of his, or how is it fit together? How the overlaps occurred?
Well, to start from Joyce, Joyce was probably the greatest anthropologist who ever lived, and it's a scandal that he's not taught in all anthropology classes. And it was through the study of Joyce that Joseph Campbell developed his unique approach to anthropology. The first book he wrote after The Skeleton Key was The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And that book would be impossible without the skeleton key. The skeleton key gave him the monomyth, the archetype behind all the other archetypes that he uses in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and then develops in his later books, like the 4-volume Masks of God and so on. But Joyce was Campbell's guide, just as he's the guide to quantum mechanics in many senses. Murray Gell-Mann, Nobel Prize winner, got his 3-quark model out of Finnegans Wake. The 3 quarks are 3 major characters in Finnegans Wake. The 2 twins who are opposites, and the 3rd who was both twins combined, and still a 3rd independent character. And to understand thoughts like that, 2 twins who are opposites and the 3rd who combines both of them, you got to think in a Taoist way. Like the joke, how many Zen masters does it take to change a light bulb? 2, one to change it and one not to change it. Oh, that's the logic of the Shem, Ham, Japhet relationship in Finnegans Wake, which is also the Bacon, Shakespeare, Raleigh relationship, and the Tom, Dick, and Harry, and the many other types of trilogies in the human mind, including the Holy Trinity, and Dog Father, Dog Son, and Co., which sounds like an English company name, but it's actually Charles Dodgson, Lewis Carroll, the two twins who are opposites, Dodgson the logician and Lewis Carroll the fantasist, were united in the one body of a certain man who was Dodgson part of the time and Carroll part of the time, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He wrote treatises on the pure mathematical foundations of logic, and he wrote out with one part of his mind and wrote Alice in Wonderland with the other part. So Dog Father, Dog Son, and Co. is Dodgson divided up into the 3 parts like the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and Co, the Holy Pigeon.
That's like James Keyes and G. Spencer Brown. G. Spencer Brown is the mathematician, and James Keyes is the expression that develops his anima. He's from England, at Oxford, I believe. Have you ever run into him?
No, I haven't met him.
Yeah, G. Spencer Brown. Laws of Form.
Yeah, I read the Laws of Form.
Anyway, so you've been doing articles about Finnegans Wake and talks now and then. Have you any particular thoughts that you'd like to develop that are current with you at the moment?
Well, I've been at Finnegans Wake for so long. There are so many sides to it. The side that's been preoccupying me lately is the synchronicity aspect, which is very, very curious because Jung didn't publish on synchronicity until long after Finnegans Wake was finished. And yet Joyce seems to be writing, Finnegans Wake seems to be an illustration of Jung's theories, but it isn't. It was written before Jung developed those theories. Joyce and Jung met a few times, and they didn't like each other, by the way. Joyce thought Jung thought Joyce was a possible candidate for therapy, and Jung thought Joyce was a man on the edge of schizophrenia who remained on the safe side through his art. And if he lost his art, he'd go completely wacko. And so there was...
His daughter, too. Didn't he work with his daughter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Joyce did not wish to believe his daughter was schizophrenic. He told Jung, I'm doing the same experiments with language that she is. And Jung said, the difference is you're diving and she's sinking.
So, Jung, would you say then that Jung could have gotten some of his ideas from, or they were just synchronistic ideas? They were just.
I'm inclined to suspect Jung was influenced by Joyce because Jung certainly had the highest regard for Ulysses. He said he recommended it as a new Bible for the white race on the grounds that the Bible has warped the development of Western humanity in certain egotistic directions. And Jung thought the development of the true self or higher self required a dose of Oriental thinking and feeling, and he felt Joyce had brought that into Western literature with Ulysses. And when Finnegans Wake started to appear, Jung wrote a comment on it in which he said, this is either mental illness or a degree of mental health inconceivable to most people. And I think Jung finally decided it was a degree of mental health inconceivable to most people because a lot of Jung develops right out of Finnegans Wake, just like a lot of Joseph Campbell did. The synchronistic element includes many seeming cases of precognition, and I'm going to do a whole book about this eventually just to annoy the Committee for Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, but Joyce has much better credentials as a prophet than Nostradamus has. So many things in Finnegans Wake seem to refer to events after 1939 when Finnegans Wake was published. As for instance, the middle chapter of the book, the story of how Buckley shot the Russian general. Buckley was a friend of Joyce's father who served in the Crimean War, which to Joyce was a symbol of all wars because it had the word crime in it. And Buckley saw a Russian general in a field and was going to shoot him because the primary military rule is always shoot the highest ranking officer of the enemy army. And as Buckley was about to shoot, the general took down his pants and sat down to take a crap in the field. And Buckley, telling the story in Dublin pubs as he was wont to in old age, Buckley said it made him look so human I couldn't shoot. And then the general finished and pulled his pants up again, and he was an enemy officer again, and Buckley shot the poor bastard dead in his tracks. And somehow to Joyce, this is a symbol of this is a symbol of the plight or the predicament or the comedy of humanity. That the general is human with his pants down and his ass sticking out, and he's not human anymore with the uniform on. And in telling the story of how Buckley shot the Russian general, Joyce incorporates all the battles of human history. You can find every battle in every history book. And the charge of the Light Brigade and Brian Boru fighting the Danes in Clontarf in 1014, the Peloponnesian Wars, and, there's been long commentaries on all the military history that Joyce put into that one chapter, together with all the anal jokes of which the English language is capable. Joyce seems to have shared Freud's view that war is anal sadism. And mixed in with this, there's a running theme about the atoms and ifs, which goes back to the first sentence of the book, river run past even atoms. Even atom are the male and female archetypes that dominate the book and become all the different male and female combinations. And they're like the yin and the yang in I Ching. They also appear as a river and a mountain, as well as a woman and a man. And they seem to be complementary cosmic principles. And the atoms and the ifs is a pun on this Adam and Eve, basic yin and yang duality, but it also refers to the uncertainty principle in atomic physics, atoms and ifs. Everything is uncertain on the quantum level. And Joyce says all these quantum puns running through the chapter, not only atoms and ifs, but blown to atoms, which takes you back to the Garden of Eden again, but has a reference to the atom bomb. And there are solid bodies all atomed. And then there's a reference to Nogi Soki, followed closely by a reference to Lipinese language, which is the Nipponese language, which is followed by Sayonara Pukul-san, which is Nipponese language for farewell, Honorable Puka. The puka being a 6-foot-tall white rabbit who resides in County Kerry and is well known in Irish folklore. But Sayonara Pukul-san is also a pun in Norwegian Yiddish for look at the hunchbacked fool. And there's a theme about the hunchbacked sailor cheating the tailor that runs all through that chapter. And the sailor and the tailor are like the two twins who keep changing places, because sailor is tailor and tailor is sailor. It's just an ST transformation, which is part of Einstein's theory of relativity, the ST transformations in the space-time equations. And then there's the trudge of the light barricade, which refers to the two-hole experiment in quantum mechanics, where light is both particles and waves. And that's followed by a geranium curtain, which sounds like the flower, the geranium, but Joyce spells it with a U, so you got the uranium in there. That's the trigger of the atom bomb. And it runs all through the chapter. You can find this theme of the atom bombing of Nagasaki, which hadn't happened yet, except in Joyce's head. And that's the aspect of Finnegans Wake, as I said, that I'm most interested in these days.
Have you found any prophecies that would actually be prophetic to us at this point?
The major theme of Finnegans Wake is the fall and the rise. On the first page, you got the Wall Street stock market crashing and the fall of the Roman Empire and Adam and Eve falling because of the forbidden fruit and Humpty Dumpty falling off the wall and Tim Finnegan falling off the wall in the old Irish drinking song from which the book takes its title, and the dreamer falling asleep into the collective unconscious of the species, and below that into the non-local consciousness of the entire cosmos. And all this falling is followed by a rising at the end in which the river turns into the air molecules. The river becomes one with the sea and the Irish Sea. And the Irish Sea becomes air molecules which become clouds which float over the Wicklow Hills. And they come down as rain, and you're back at the beginning of the book where this rain is the river and a Liffey forming in the Wicklow Hills to flow through Dublin and go out to the sea and become them. So you got this cyclical rise and fall. And I find more and more that the symbolism of the thing suggests the fall of the DNA to this planet, which is Fred Hoyle's cosmological theory that DNA didn't happen by accident. It was propagated throughout the galaxy by higher intelligences. And you got the DNA falling on this planet, and Finnegans Wake has all these metamorphoses. You got the 4 stages of the insect, the egg, the chrysalis, the larva, and the adult. And I got them slightly out of order there, I think. I'm not an entomologist. And then you've got the Lords of the Four Quarters, Matt Gregory, Marcus Lyons, Luke Tarpey, Johnny McDougall, which is Matt, Mark, Luke, John, bless the bed that I lie on, an old children's prayer. But it's also the 4 chambers of the human heart and the 4 kings of the tarot deck and the 4 provinces of Ireland. But it's this basic 4-part cycle there, which Joyce calls their weatherings and their marryings and their buryings and their natural selections, which refers to all these insect and mammalian patterns, the parallels that Joyce keeps drawing. He manages to combine the evolution of plants, the evolution of insects, and the evolution of mammals into this structure, and it's all part of the deepest part of the collective unconscious that Joyce is exploring in Finnegans Wake. And this is the cycle of the DNA being spread through the galaxy, falling onto the Earth, going through these primitive stages of evolution, and then rising up from the Earth at the end to return to union with the rest of the galaxy. And I think Joyce is prophesying the whole space age that we're now entering.
Well, Arthur Young also has a theory which is a cosmological unifying theory, and it's saying the same thing. And what kept coming to me was the fourness that you were talking about, and it also reminded me of the Shakespeare Bacon controversy. There's a whole lot of overlapping going on between everybody right now. I mean, there's a lot talk about synchronicity. So many. Maybe it's because Joyce has come into his time or something. Because I hear the same rap actually in many different situations, and I don't know that we can all say that it comes from Joyce or whether he just has brought on the time of this kind of birthing of thought.
Brian O'Nolan is supposed to have said in the 1950s, when they first started celebrating Bloomsday in Dublin, he said, sure, we're all living in Joyce's head. And now it seems it's not just Dublin, it's a contagion, it's spreading all over the world. The Bacon Shakespeare thing you mentioned in Joyce, Bacon and Shakespeare are another model of the twin theme. Bacon is the rationalist and Shakespeare is the poet, but some people think they're one. And so the two become 3, the hidden unity. And that makes them isomorphic with the 3 sons of Noah, who are Joyce's basic archetype of 3ness, Shem, Japheth, and Ham. And the thing fits together because Ham and Bacon make a pun linking the 2 trios together. And the whole thing makes a hidden unity because Shakespeare's coat of arms had a boar's head on it. And so you got the boar, the ham, and the bacon, which has the Adonis theme in it. In Finnegans Wake, everything refers back to the dying and resurrected God, and Adonis is one of the dying and resurrected gods, along with Christ and Tim Finnegan and Osiris and so on.
Well, when we think of Finnegans Wake now, do we have a sort of a trend that we can follow in terms of getting on one line? If there's so many ways to go and so many different aspects and streams that we can follow, is there sort of a beginning, a middle, and an end that we could ever find, or a trend, a theme besides all of these themes? Can we have a storyline? We know it's one day. We know Finnegans Wake goes through actually one night.
One night.
Yeah, one night. And Joseph Campbell said that he thought that it was one of a trilogy which would end with a dream sequence that was even more of another world that James Joyce was planning to write after Finnegans Wake. Do you have any feeling about that? Did you hear or think about anything of that nature?
In his last 2 years, Joyce didn't seem to know what to do. He, having done Ulysses and Finnegans Wake, he was kind of puzzled what to try next. It's a fascinating thought to think what he might have tried next if he had lived, but...
Yeah, well, Joseph Campbell seemed to be quite convinced that he was going to write something which linked the Indian philosophy, Hinduism and whatnot, much more into the symbology than he did.
Well, the four kalpas of the Hindu system are a very basic part of Finnegans Wake anyway. That's the four stages of evolution I was talking about. That Joyce keeps playing with. The old Jacobite song, Charlie, you're my darling, my darling. You still hear that in Ireland. They're still fighting the Jacobite wars 200 years later. And that appears in Finnegans Wake as Charlie, you're my Darwin, which is a pun on Charles Darwin, but it also refers to Charlie the chimp, who was one of the denizens of the Phoenix Park Zoo when Joyce was young. Everything in Finnegans Wake revolves around the Phoenix Park Zoo, which is Noah's Ark, and it contains the whole history of evolution. And it's in the woods by the Phoenix Park Zoo that the dreamer gets into an embarrassing encounter with 2 teenage girls and 3 British soldiers, which, if you can follow all the clues in the dream, clearly involved exhibitionism, voyeurism, masturbation, homosexuality, murder, cannibalism, and killing the king and the pope. And it's obvious the dreamer's sense of guilt is somewhat exaggerated. He's a Protestant, but he's a middle-class Protestant in Dublin, which makes him kind of out of place and unpopular. And yet he's instilled this Catholic sexual horror of Ireland because he's living there. That's the middle level of Finnegans Wake. That's the Freudian level. Below that, there's the Jungian level of the collective unconscious, the dying and reborn God, the great triple goddess, the maiden, bride, and crone, and the moon goddess, and the lords of the four quarters, and the 4 Masonic officers in the temple, and the playing card kings, and so on. And below that, there's the non-local level, in which the dreaming mind is in contact with the whole of history, past and present, the whole history of the human species and all the other species throughout the galaxy. And this non-local consciousness just entered science in 1975 with Edwin Harris Walker's paper, The Complete Quantum Anthropologist, in which he proposes a non-local theory of consciousness. But it's there in Finnegans Wake already, just like Murray Gell-Mann found the 3 quarks in Finnegans Wake.
Does Murray actually say that that's where he got it?
Yes, Murray Gell-Mann says that he thought of the term quarks, and he couldn't remember where he got it from for 3 days, and then he remembered it was in Finnegans Wake. It's in the chapter where the seagulls sing 3 quarks for Muster Mark. That's King Mark of Cornwall is in his palace in Cornwall, but the seagulls are looking at Tristan and Isolde making love in the boat, and they're carrying it from one seagull to another till it gets back to the ears of King Mark, which is much better than the medieval version of the legend. It's much more dreamlike.
It's probably more accurate in a way. I mean, not that the seagulls would say it, but that somehow he would get the intuitive.
Well, it turns out there are 4 seagulls. The 4 seagulls are Matt, Mark, Luke, and John. But they're also the 4 lawyers that Ford Maddox Ford turned that chapter over to. He wanted to print part of Finnegans Wake in the Transatlantic Review, and Joyce sent him that chapter, and Ford Maddox Ford was able to decipher enough of it to decide that it was possibly actionable under the obscenity laws. So he had 4 lawyers read it, and the lawyers agreed that nobody would understand enough of it to say it was obscene. And Joyce was informed about this, so he rewrote it and included the 4 lawyers in the chapter. So you got the 4 seagulls telling about Tristan and Isolde bawling in the boat, and you got the 4 evangelists telling their version of it, and you got the 4 lawyers trying to explain to Ford Maddox Ford whether or not it's obscene. Which is a typical Joycean structure in Finnegans Wake. That's simpler than some, but a few chapters later, you got the postman, Sean, who comes from a 19th century melodrama called Arana Pogue, which means Nora of the Kiss, and ties in with the autobiographical theme because Nora was Joyce's wife. And Sean the postman is complaining about his sore feet. At the same time, he's an orator giving a political speech. He's running for election. So you got this double image of the postman explaining about his sore feet and the politician promising the Irish to relieve all their distresses and sufferings. And the 14 paragraphs of the chapter in which you have this double exposure of postman and politician, those 14 paragraphs, if you read them backwards, you'll find the Stations of the Cross backwards, which is a Catholic ceremony which has to do with death and resurrection, which takes you back again to Tim Finnegan falling off the wall and rising at his wake, and the whole fall and rise theme. And the 14 Stations of the Cross are arranged in the form of a Bach fugue, and it's backwards and backwards at the same time, because backwards and backwards only have one letter different, and Bach liked to write his melodies so that they were going forward and backward at the same time. And Joyce wanted to show he could do the same thing in prose. But Bach also means bacon in Old High German, and this brings us back to Bacon and Shakespeare and Ham, Shem, and Japhet, and the Trinity and the duality, and the duality and the unity. And it's fascinating how all these things fit together, because Bach in modern German means brook. And that brings us back to the triple goddess again, who starts out as a brook and then becomes the river and ends up as the sea. And so Finnegans Wake is like a hologram. In David Bohm's theory of the universe is a hologram. The information of the whole is contained in any part, and the information of Finnegans Wake is contained in any part. It's hologramic prose. But the most fascinating thing about Joyce is that every major Irish writer of this century has been fanatically anti-Catholic. That country drives you absolutely batty. I love it, but you can't come out if you want to keep any mental life going. You can't come out without a bitter battle with the Catholic Church in which you end up hating it for life. I can't think of any major Irish writer who ever got around to forgiving the Church. When Joyce was dying, his relatives asked if they could bring a priest to the bedside while he was in a coma. And Nora said, "Sure, I couldn't do that to him while he's helpless." And Joyce has managed to turn himself into this national cult, which they make millions of pounds out of every year. All the tourists who come from all over the world to walk around on Bloomsday and go to the theatrical celebrations and all the Bloomsday things that go on. This is Our island lives on agriculture and tourism, and this is a large part of the tourism. So Dublin finds itself every year wrapped up in this James Joyce cloud, which is making money for it, which it can't resist being a poor country. And all this money is pouring in, and so they're making Joyce into a national saint. And of course, they all still hate him because he was a dirty atheist and a blasphemer, and he wrote dirty books, and so on. They hate him, but they're making all this money off him. Every year they have to go through this Bloomsday celebration, and now we know why Joyce picked Bloomsday to be June 16th. The reason is, in June 16th, most Joyce scholars won't admit it. They write about it in euphemisms. The only one who is absolutely clear, it's very clear in Joyce's letters, but the only Joyce scholar who's written about it in unambiguous language is Richard Ellman. On June 16, 1904, Joyce tried to have intercourse with Nora Barnacle, who was a 20-year-old virgin from Galway, and she refused to have intercourse, but she masturbated him. And about 3 months later, he finally got her around to intercourse, and they lived together for 17 years, after which she persuaded him to marry her against his anarchist principles. But after 17 years, he was kindly disposed toward her and was willing to give in on matters like that. Although he tried to hide the fact they were getting married. He was furious when reporters found out about it. And so every year Dublin is celebrating this act of masturbation in a Catholic country where that's still a mortal sin, and where you can't buy condoms without showing a marriage license.
Surprising.
That's his greatest joke on the Catholic Church. You know?
They do never say that. They always say it's his first date, and to somehow memorialize.
The Irish Times always says every year, this was the first day on which Joyce and Nora walked out together. Isn't that a lovely euphemism?
Well, the tower is really a nice thing. They have his old instrument there and some bits and pieces of his stuff that he kept. I thought that was really nice. The Martello Tower, yeah, Joyce Tower. And the performances were good, actually. Being one of those tourists that dumped a few pounds in Dublin.
Fionnuala Flanagan's movie, James Joyce's Women, is tremendous. She first did that on the stage in Dublin. I saw her do it on the stage in San Francisco, and now it's on film, and that's a marvelous performance. She has a perfect American accent as Sylvia Beach, and as Nora she has the Galway accent, and as Molly Bloom she has the Dublin accent, and everything is technically... They train actors very well in Ireland. American actors are not nearly so well trained in the elements of the craft. I'm beginning to sound like an Irish chauvinist at times, don't I?
Well, you're here now. Have you done any performances in Ireland relative to Finnegans Wake, or any of the material that Joyce has done? Or talks, I guess you call them.
I've lectured at Trinity a couple of times, but not on Joyce. I spoke to the James Joyce Society in Zurich, and I felt like sending copies of the program to the Joyce Society in Dublin with rude remarks on it, but I restrained myself.
Is there a group, wherever it is that you make your nest, that get together? I mean, do you have compadres in your Joycean love study?
Not lately. I haven't stayed in one place long enough. I used to have the James Joyce study groups, which were lots of fun because people would come in with the most diverse backgrounds and go into hysterics of laughter at the jokes about their field of knowledge that Joyce was making in Finnegans Wake. I had one mathematician who I thought I knew a lot of mathematics for a layman, but I realized there were 100 mathematical jokes in Finnegans Wake for every one that I got by myself. And it goes on and on. You can find whatever your field is. There's a whole life of Mohammed in Finnegans Wake, including the name of his horse, even down to details like that. The whole life of Confucius, the whole history of Ireland. Every atrocity the English ever committed against Ireland is in Finnegans Wake, which makes it kind of funny to hear people say Joyce was an apolitical artist.
Right. Well, he definitely leads us kind of an intellectual rebellion, though, that could be mirrored by a lot more of the Irish at this point, given their problems with rebellion.
Yes, they had a contest in Dunleary a couple of years ago. They were putting up a stone in a tree to honor Joyce in Sandy Cove near the tower. And this is based on the stone in the tree in Finnegans Wake, which is another of the two twins. The stone is dead and the tree is alive. But the hidden unity is coal. When the tree is dead long enough, it becomes coal, which is stone. And so there's the link between the living and the dead. Everything is linked. And so they put up the tree and the stone, and they had a contest for a sentence from Joyce to put on the stone. People sent in their favorite sentences. And I was not disappointed in my expectation that my choice was not the one they used. My choice was from a letter he wrote to his brother Stanislaus. What liberation would it be to cast off the political tyranny of England and remain under the intellectual tyranny of Rome? And a 95% Catholic country, I didn't think they would put that on the stone, and they did not. What they put on the stone was the sea's ruler. He gazed over the sea. I can't remember the whole sentence. It begins the sea's ruler, and it refers to an English character in Ulysses, which led to an outbreak of fury among some Joyceans. What was wrong with the committee? That they were so ignorant of Ulysses and so idiotic they picked a sentence about an Englishman from this great Irish novel. So they got into more controversy. They should have taken my nomination.
Oh, that's terrible. Gee. Well, when you are, how would you say a group of people came to you wanting to know, the first thing about Finnegans Wake? You pick up the book, and just how to approach it in some sort of way that won't be completely frustrating. A lot of people pick it up and put it down because it's just too deep in some way, or it doesn't make any sense.
Well, the best way to approach Finnegans Wake is in a group. It has to be stalked like a wild animal, and you need a hunting party. I've been reading Finnegans Wake alone for many, many years before I discovered this, and then I started organizing Finnegans Wake groups. It was Tyndall, I think, who was the first to say Finnegans Wake has to be read aloud. The second thing is it's best in groups. And the third law, which I discovered, is it's best in groups with several six-packs of Guinness on the table. The more Guinness you drink, the clearer Finnegans Wake gets. Sir Arthur Guinness is one of the major characters in Finnegans Wake.
And one of the major supporters of Bloomsday, still.
Yes. They put ads in all the pubs with quotes from Joyce about Guinness on Bloomsday, and they always leave out the quote where Bloom thinks about Guinness, charitable man he was, endowed all those homes for the insane. Of course, it was his booze that put them there in the first place. They never quote that in their advertisements.
Well, in the last years of Campbell's work, could you see any direct connection with the fact that he had done the skeleton key and that, I know that you said his whole life was based on it, his whole works. Can you give any kind of tying the whole thing up to any specific sorts of little bits and pieces?
Yes, I'm going to sound fashionable, which I hate to sound fashionable. But the most contemporary thing in Joyce, and which played a major role in Campbell's later work, he was increasingly invited to speak to groups of nuns, I know. There are a lot of radical nuns in the church, and what Campbell had to say about the female aspect of divinity was very interesting to these nuns who are beginning to feel there's something a bit lopsided about a church in which the entire hierarchy is male, and they're off in a corner somewhere with no place in the hierarchy. And that's a major theme in Joyce, which is again tied up with, I got to drag in my own hobby horse, with synchronicity. And Joyce thought Ibsen was the greatest playwright who ever lived. He loved Ibsen so much he learned Norwegian so he could write a fan letter to Ibsen in his own language. Or was it Danish? They kept changing the name of that area. I think it was called Dano-Norwegian, the language at that point, whatever they were speaking.
And they were so different, too. Ibsen seemed so kind of bleak in a way, and yet everything that Joyce wrote seemed buoyant.
Yeah, well, Joyce wrote a great deal about the theory of tragedy in his 1904 notebooks, and he ended up by deciding comedy was the higher art because it gladdens the heart. And
Ibsen definitely did not.
Well, Ibsen became the symbol of feminism for a long time because of A Doll's House. And the end of The Doll's House, where Nora slams the door, runs all through Finnegans Wake. There's this continuous crash of thunder, which is connected with all sorts of things, but it's always tied in with Nora's voice. Nora, voice from a fire, on the first page. And that's Joyce's Nora, who was always saying, Jim, why don't you go on the stage as a singer instead of writing these books nobody understands? Because Joyce had a great singing voice. He almost beat John McCormick in the contest. The judges said they would have given Joyce first place, except he failed the sight reading test. He had a magnificent voice. And Nora wanted him to sing songs that people would understand instead of writing these weird books. And so Ibsen's Nora and Joyce's Nora are sort of two symbols of the rise of the female energy in the modern world. And Joyce deliberately made Bloom in Ulysses the antithesis in every way of the macho values. And in Bloom's Nightmare Trial, he's declared a hermaphrodite by expert medical testimony, the new model of the womanly man of the future, and so on. There's the whole androgyny of the modern age is a major theme in Joyce, and the whole women's liberation theme is very powerfully there. That's part of the prophetic side of Joyce that I've been talking about.
Yeah, Campbell's last piece, actually, his last creative work, is going to come out in a book called Goddess. So there it is then. And
it's amazing how this theme in Joyce gets stronger and stronger. The Exiles ends with the female character having a long speech, and the male character only interrupts a couple of times and says less and less. And it almost turns into a monologue. And Ulysses does end with a female monologue, and so does Finnegans Wake. And
getting the last word. Well, also he definitely shows women in a respectful situation. I feel all of his interpretations, at the same time as he shows the flaws.
Yeah, well, that's it. Joyce is so complicated. There have been books written claiming that Joyce hated women. And the reason such books can be written is that Joyce's characters are so complicated. Every one of his female characters is marvelous and terribly flawed and full of imperfections. But that's true of his male characters, too. And so even though Joyce, to me, appears one of the great male feminists, his female characters are certainly not idealized any more than his male characters. Joyce was the world's staunchest enemy of idealism.
But they're strong. The women are.
Yes, and they are tremendously flexible. In the symbolism of Finnegans Wake, the woman is the river and the man is the mountain, and the mountain seems strong, but it's kind of frozen, and the river is alive and dancing. And this is very much like the yang and the yin principles in I Ching. Finnegans Wake is isomorphic to I Ching. I have an essay about that in the latest issue of Semiotext. It's kind of hard to pursue verbally. It needs mathematical symbols to show the full isomorphism.
So that's the current Semiotext. Do you want to spell that for us?
SCMIOTEXT:(E) close colon, and I've never got the editor to explain that strange spelling to me.
So this is pursuit of Finnegans Wake and other Joyce material is becoming more and more popular. Are you getting more jobs in the line of writing about it?
Yes, actually, I've had quite a few things about Joyce published lately in a variety of places.
And do they? Are you addressing a bunch of different aspects, or are you honing in again on synchronicity or a pet subject?
Well, I've been writing a lot about synchronicity and quantum mechanics in Finnegans Wake, but I also have done a few pieces on the theme of the Russian general and the anal territorial circuits of the brain that Joyce is exploring in that strange multi-leveled parable about Buckley and the Russian general. Freud knew there was a connection between anality and sadism, and Freud never figured out what it was, but now we know from ethology that mammals mark their territories with excretions, and the connection between territoriality and conflict and excretion is very deep in primate genetically programmed behaviors. It's not due to bad toilet training, as Freud thought. It's a deep mammalian instinct to identify excretion and territoriality. And Joyce explores that extensively in the whole symbolism of the Russian general who was human while he was taking a crap and became an enemy officer when he had his uniform on again. And it's also the major theme of the book itself. That Buckley thing is a hologram within a hologram, because the basic structure of Finnegans Wake seems, at least on one level, it's on so many levels, but on at least one level, it's the dreamer is reliving in disguised forms over and over every part of the dream in one way or another with everything else it contains. It contains this pattern of the dreamer taking a crap in the bushes of Phoenix Park, and then seeing two girls who had come into the bushes to pee, and then seeing three soldiers, and the dream that's what leads to the clustering in the dream of these images of voyeurism, exhibitionism, masturbation, murder, regicide, cannibalism, and killing the Pope.
Quite a lineup.
Well, it's the flip side of the Irish consciousness. Everything that's repressed in the daytime is coming out in the night. The return of the repressed. Well, one of the most interesting symbolisms in Finnegans Wake, which it took me years to figure out, is the twin suns, the two opposites on the Irish level of the dream, the close to the surface. These are the two twin suns of the dreamer, and he keeps dreaming that one son, the good son, Sean, will go to America and become a millionaire, and the bad son, Shem, will be sent to Australia. You see, in the old days, Irish revolutionaries and criminals were shipped to Australia, which was the English penal colony. And in the dream, America is heaven and Australia is hell. And America is heaven because so many Irish got rich here, and Australia is hell because so many were sent there as criminals, and also because it's down under. And the down under is the unconscious, where the Irish bury everything they're afraid of. And down under is Shem the penman, who's sending telegrams from Sydney Parade, which happens, it sounds like a place in Sydney, Australia, but Sydney Parade is actually a railway station in Dublin. And these telegrams are from the Irish unconscious, exposing the fact that Ireland's ass is hanging out in the park.
He's definitely a comedian, if you can catch the gist.
Yeah, Joyce is a comedian, but his comedy goes to the essence of existence. He's a Zen comedian. One of the clues to Finnegans Wake for me was Yositani Roshi, the Zen master, who said in a talk at Yellow Springs in 1962, "There's nothing extraordinary about Satori. You do it every night in your sleep. Zen is just a trick for doing it while awake." And when you get to the fourth level of Finnegans Wake, below the ego and below the personal unconscious of Freud, with all the sexual taboos being violated, and the collective unconscious of Jung with the archetypes of the moon goddess and the dying and rising god and so on, the fourth level down is this non-local consciousness, which includes everything.
If we have included everything, that would give a reason why he couldn't, he floundered a little bit at the end of his life without something to further. I mean, he had actually done his work. He never did write, and Joyce never wrote anything at all after Finnegans Wake?
So far as anybody's been able to discover, he didn't write a word. He spoke a few sentences to friends about things he was thinking of writing, and they're very cryptic sentences. He said something simple. He had enough of complexity after 17 years.
Now, there's a movie out called The Dead, I believe. John Huston has brought it out, based on James Joyce's Dubliners, no?
It's the last story in Dubliners.
Have you seen that yet?
No, I haven't. I very much like to. The Dead is based on a real incident. Joyce fictionalized it. The real incident was a chap named Michael Bodkin who fell in love with Nora Barnacle in Galway. He stood outside her window one night singing love songs all night long in the typical Galway weather. That is to say, it was raining. It never stops raining in Galway. They're going to love me in Galway when they hear this. Actually, it stops raining 3 days of the year. They have 9 months of winter and 3 months of bad weather. But anyway, Michael Bodkin stood outside the window in the rain singing love songs all night, and he got pneumonia and died. And this is the most typical Irish story imaginable, but it really happened. It sounds like every Irish melodrama. And Joyce was fascinated by Michael Bodkin, I think because Joyce felt that he would not die for love himself. He was too hard-boiled and cynical for that. And on one deep level of Finnegans Wake, the heroine is always choosing between Mick and Nick. And she always chooses Mick. Mick is Michael Bodkin. All Michaels are called Mick in Ireland. That's always their nickname. And Nick is the devil, or James Joyce, who won out in real life, but in the dream, Mick always wins out. And Joyce felt that in the deep level of Nora's mind, Mick always did win out because he died for love and was so romantic. And
he was possessed by that, actually, wasn't he?
In 1909, he went to Galway to look at Michael Bodkin's grave, and the grave next to it said J. Joyce, which did a great deal to increase our man's faith in synchronicity, even though Jung hadn't named it synchronicity then. But that's also the theme of The Dead, and The Dead, Joyce is portrayed by Gabriel Conroy, who's a very unhappy middle-class intellectual, which Joyce might have become if he had stayed in Ireland. And his wife, Greta, who comes from Galway, and the climax of the story is the revelation of this previous relationship with Michael Fury. Joyce changed Michael Bodkin to Michael Fury to make the symbolism of the Archangel Michael come out in the flames of glory and so on. The Dead is a very, very beautiful, realistic story, but Finnegans Wake tells the same story over in much more vivid themes. Mick becomes the Archangel Michael, and Joyce becomes Satan being thrown down into hell or Australia with the other convicts.
Also, we've seen a movie, a Finnegans Wake movie, that was very elusive, in fact. Do you remember, Brian, the maker of that movie? The director, producer, whatever? Because I don't. If you've ever seen
it's a great movie.
A black and white movie that's called Finnegans Wake.
Passages from Finnegans. Yes, I saw that a long time ago in Chicago. Yes,
we've been trying to track that one.
That's delightful.
Yeah, and that's the only. I mean, The Dead is the next ones that, or well, of course, in that Peter O'Toole biography, but very little material actually comes out in the media, given all the kind of underground popularity that Joyce is fomenting.
Well, they have made films of Ulysses and A Portrait of the Artist, and now The Dead.
It's over the number of years and the popularity, though, that he seems to be amassing, it seems. Are you going to, in your next screenplay, do anything that's relevant to Ulysses or Finnegans Wake or any of the Joyce material?
Only to the extent that my style is heavily influenced by Joyce. Everything I do has a Joycean element in it.
Well, if we were going to pursue the whole Finnegans Wake path here, what would be the next thing that you'd like to develop, the next concept you'd like to develop for the listeners?
Well, why not have the guests in the studio ask a few questions?
Okay, we have to mic the guests in the studio.
Oh, it is. Sorry.
It's okay? Yeah. Do we have any questions?
I have an offshoot question.
Good.
To do with synchronicity. And I'm wondering how you see synchronicity in terms of history, in terms of the history of the role that it plays. Maybe in terms of increased intelligence, maybe, I'm not sure if you have a view about that.
Synchronicity and history?
Seems to me it's a very powerful thing that continues to occur, that Jung talks about, evidently Joyce refers to, and I would wonder if the coming together of events like that doesn't play a role in human intelligence and its development through time.
That's one of the major themes of Finnegans Wake. Synchronicity is the theme that I've been concentrating on, but the second major theme in Finnegans Wake is history. And the philosopher that Joyce said influenced him most in writing Finnegans Wake is Guillaume Battista Vico, who's sometimes called the father of sociology. Vico believed there were repeats in history, and so did Joyce. In the Portrait of the Artist as a young man, Stephen Daedalus, as his name suggests, repeats the careers of St. Stephen, the first martyr, and Daedalus. Daedalus was locked in a prison and built wings and flew out of the prison, and Joyce felt our Catholic Ireland was a prison, and he escaped by building wings to fly to the continent, which was relatively free compared to Ireland. And so the parallel with St. Stephen is that St. Stephen was stoned to death, and that parallels the reception Joyce got from Irish critics when his book started appearing. And Ulysses, Leopold Bloom is Odysseus in the Odyssey and the ghost of Hamlet's father, and the father in Don Giovanni by Mozart, and several other historical characters. And Stephen Daedalus is St. Stephen, and Daedalus again combined with Telemachus from the Odyssey looking for his father. And Molly Bloom is the earth goddess and Penelope, and Joyce was fascinated by the parallels in history, the same pattern repeating over and over again. I have been using the word isomorphism in my recent writings because what Joyce is doing, when he did it, there was no word for synchronicity in the first place. Joyce had his own vocabulary in his own head somewhere for these things. But he not only has Jungian synchronicities in his books, these meaningful connections in space, coincidence, as it's generally called. He's also got these parallels in time, in history. And the one word in mathematics that fits both cases is isomorphism, which is similarity of structure. The events of Ulysses are similar in structure to the Odyssey and Hamlet and Don Giovanni. And Finnegans Wake is similar in structure to the song Finnegans Wake and to the four Gospels and to the Egyptian myth of Osiris and the Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead and 1,700 other things at least. And Finnegans Wake contains all these isomorphisms of insect evolution compared to human evolution, and Irish history compared to Roman history, and British history compared to American history, and so on. And so Joyce saw non-local connections running every way in space-time. Sheldon Breivik said the unconscious as portrayed by Joyce is not an area in the brains of his creatures, but a network of connections that extends throughout space-time. And that's
what synchronicity is.
And that's what consciousness is, according to Edwin Harris Walker, the physicist I quoted earlier. And that's implicit in David Bohm's theory of the hidden variable, or the realm of the implicate order. Bohm's implicate order, which is everywhere the same throughout space-time, is comparable to a hologram, as Bohm always says, in trying to popularize his ideas. And Finnegans Wake is similar to a hologram in the same way that the part contains the whole. So space and time, history and synchronicity are all related the way Joyce looks at it.
Well, do you have any little examples that you'd like to read to us that come to your mind?
I'd like to read two of my favorite passages. They're both from the chapter about Shem the penman. Shem the penman is a character from Victorian melodrama. Jim the penman was an Irishman who went to Paris and became a forger. And Joyce went to Paris. Joyce was in Gaelic. James Joyce would be Seamus Sheehy. And so Joyce was Seamus or Shem in Gaelic. And so he took this Victorian melodrama as a parallel to his own life. And so in Finnegans Wake, he treats his books as forgeries. In this passage, the theme of forgery and alchemy are intimately connected, because Joyce also regarded himself as an alchemist, taking all the gross matter of the world and turning it into sublime, eternal art. And he also compares his work to what the priest does in the Mass. Only Joyce felt he was doing it for real, and the priests were faking it, which is to turn the mortal into the immortal. And so this is an alchemist or a forger. It's either a magician or a criminal. It's also a parody of Joyce and his obsessions. The house of O'Shea, or O'Shame, known as the Haunted Ink Bottle, No Number, Brimstone Walk, Asia in Ireland, and as it was infested with the raps, with his pen name shut, sepia scraped to the doorplate, and a blind of black sailcloth over its wan fish bogue, in which the soul-contracted son of the secret cell groped through life at the expense of the taxpayers, dejected into day and night with Jesuit bark and bitter bite, calcedohydrants of Zolfer for Sculpolania by full and 40 queasy nose, every day in everyone's way, more exceeding in violent abuse of self and others, was the worst, it is hoped, even in our Western playboyish world, for pure mouse-farm filth, You brag of your brass castle or your tiled house in Ballyfairmont. Nigs, nigs, and nigs again. For this was a stinksome ink and stink, quite puzzle to the Rodels, matter of fact. Angels afternoon browning there through, not Edom reeked more rare. My wud! The warped flooring of his lair and the sound-conducting walls thereof, to say nothing of the uprights and imposts, were Persianly literatured with burst love letters, tell-tale stories, sticky-back snaps, doubtful eggshells, bouchers, flints, borers, puffers, amalgamide diamonds, rindless raisins, Alfie Betty-formed verbiage, vivical viases, competer dictas, visas bouquet, hems and ahas, ineffable tries at speech unasyllabled, you owe me's, I owed him's, flew-foul smut, fallen lucifers, vestas which had served, showered ornaments, borrowed brogues, reversible jackets, black-eye lenses, family jars, false hair shirts, God-forsaken scapulars, never-worn breeches, cutthroat ties, counterfeit francs, best intentions, curried notes, upper Latin tintax, unused mill and stumping stones, twisted quills, painful digests, magnifying wine glasses, solid objects cast at goblins, once current puns, quashed quotados, messes of marriage, unquestionable issue papers, seedy ejaculations, limerick dams, crocodile tears, spilt ink, blasphematory spits, stale chestnuts, schoolgirls, young ladies, milkmaids, washerwomen, shopkeepers' wives, merry widows, ex-nuns, vice-abbesses, pro-virgins, super-whores, silent sisters, Charlie's aunts, grandmothers, mother-in-laws, foster-mothers, godmothers, garters, trees drippings from right, lift and centrum, worms of snot, toothsome pickling, cans of Swiss condensed milk, high-blown lotions, kisses from the antipodes, presents from pickpockets, borrowed plumes, relaxable hand grips, princess promises, lees of wine, deodorized carbons, convertible collars, lucre daffers, broken wafers, unloosed shoe latchet, crooked straight waistcoats, fresh horrors from Hades, globules of mercury, undeleted gleet, glass eyes for an eye, gloss teeth for a tooth, war moans, special size, long sufferings of long standings, ahs, ohs, we's, sees, yas, yos, gaias, nays, thaws, so's, yeses, and yeses, and yeses, to which, if one has the stomach to add the breakages, upheavals, distortions, inversions of all chamber-made music, one stands, given a grain of goodwill, a fair chance of actually seeing the whirling dervish, tumult, son of thunder, self-exiled, in upon his ego, a night long of shaking betwixt tween white or red horrors, noonday terrorized to skin and bone by an ineluctable phantom. May the Shaper have mercy on him, writing the mystery of himself in furniture.
Now, why did you select that specific one?
That's one of the more nightmarish passages, but it's also one of the more charming because the nightmare gets a bit absurd. It goes too far. It's a parody of a nightmare. The dreamer is having a quiet chuckle at that point, I think. And the symbolism of the clown and the magician, the way he runs the two of them together. The artist is both a clown and a magician.
And the other piece that you had?
This is Shem the penman exposed and finally confessing. And the fascinating thing about the confession is it starts out in Shem's voice, in which he confesses all of his sins in the traditional form of the Roman Catholic confessional. But gradually his voice fades into the voice of his mother, the river, who forgives everybody and everything and just flows on with total indifference to human standards of good and evil. And it's the passive yang force giving way to the active yin force in the isomorphism with the I Ching. Dominus vobiscus, my fault, his fault, a kingship through a fault. Pariah, cannibal Cain, I who oathly forswore the womb that bore you, and the paps I sometimes sucked. You who have ever since been one black mass of jigs and jim-jams, haunted by a convulsionary sense of not having been or being all that I might have been or you meant to becoming. Bewailing like a man that innocence which I could not defend like a woman. Lo, you there, Cathman Carberry, and thank movies from the innermost depths of my still attrite heart, where in the days of youth are ever mixed my mind, now ere the compline hour of being alone at hands itself, and a puff or so before we yield our spiritus to the wind. For, though that royal one has not yet drunk a goulette from his consummation in the flower pot on the pole, the spaniel pack in their quarry, retainers and the public house proprietor have not budged a millimeter, and all that has been done or yet to be done and then done again, when day's woe and lo your doom, joy day dawns and lie you dominate. It is to you, firstborn and first fruit of woe, to me, branded sheep, pick of the waste paper baskel, by the tremors of Thundery and Ulleran's dog star, you alone, wind-blasted tree of the knowledge of beautiful and evil, clothed upon with the meteor and shimmering like the Horacen's Monologos, the child of Nilfit's father, blub, to me, unseen blusher in an obscene coal hole, the cubalabum of your secret sigh, dweller in the down and outermost, where voice only of the dead may come. Because ye left from me, because ye laughed on me, because, oh, me lonely son, ye are forgetting me, that our turf-brown mummy is a-comin', Alpilla, Beltilla, Siltilla, Deltilla, running with her tidings, all the news of the great big world. Sonny's had a scrap, woe, woe, woe. Bab's baby walks at 7 months, way, way, way. Bride leaves her raid at Punch's time. Stud stoned before a racecourse full. 2 bells that make the one appeal. Dry Yanks will visit Old Sod. And 40-yard skirts are up, madame, while Parachne wears popular short legs, and 12 hows to mix a tipsy wake. Did ye hear, Colt Cooney? Did ye ever, Philly Fortescue? With a beck, with a spring, all her rill ringlets shaking, rock drops in her taki, tram tokens in her hair, all waved to a point, and then all innuendation. Little old-fashioned mummy, little wonderful mummy, ducking under bridges, bell-hopping the wares, dodging by a bit of bog, rapid shooting round the bends, by Tollett's green hills and the pools of the Pooka, and a place they call it Blessington, and slipping sly by Sallynoggin, as happy as the day is wet, babbling, bubbling, chattering to herself, deludering the fields on their elbows, leaning with their sleuthering slide of her, giddy-gaddy, granny-ma, gossipacious Anna Olivia. He lifts the life wand, and the dumb speak.
Good examples.
Oh, I love that stuff.
The alliteration just sort of sweeps you into the flow of the...
Yeah, you really get into the flowing of the river.
Swoosh, rush, swoosh.
Yeah, the river runs all through the book. It's on many levels, and on one level, Joyce seems to have used as the setting an inn in Chapel Izard, and that inn is right next to the River Liffey. So if the dreamer is an innkeeper, and his house in the dream, his inn is right next to the river, so the river runs all through the dream very realistically. It's getting into his brain. As Joyce said, you close your eyes when you sleep, but you don't close your ears. So all the sounds of the night get into the dream. The thunder strikes 10 times, the rain falls twice, and the river runs all through it, and the church bells chime the hours, and one part of the brain is registering all those external realities, while another part is reliving the life of Confucius in China, and another part is still back in Phoenix Park explaining he didn't take down his pants to expose himself to the girls.
Phoenix Park, when we did get to Phoenix Park, it didn't look like what I thought Phoenix Park was supposed to look like. It's so big, first of all. I thought it was much more of an intimate...
That's the biggest enclosed park in Europe.
It's just like getting the great outdoors there and putting a big fence around it.
And most of the animals were donated by the Guinness family.
Uh-huh.
Which the Guinnesses are a very central part of Finnegans Wake. Guinness comes from the old Gaelic Mac Angus, which means son of Angus. Angus was the father of Isolde, and the whole Tristan and Isolde and King Mark theme runs all through Finnegans Wake. And Guinness creates the porter, which the dreamer sells at his bar all day long, which explains the recurrent question throughout the dream, why do I am a look-alike a passive porter piece? Which is, why do my two sons look as like as two peas in a pod, or why are there two sides to me? And it's also the dream memory of the refrain all day in the bar, one customer after another saying, a pint of porter, please.
Peas porridge hot.
Oh yeah, peas porridge hot is in there too, yes. Sometimes I get high enough on this stuff, I think I hear Joe McCarthy in there saying, point of order, point of order.
It would be a neat thing to do some sort of a collage using maybe a movie format or something of that nature.
Well, it's curious. I've been talking about how modern quantum physics is getting more and more Joycean, and ethology is confirming a lot of Joyce's insights into anal territorial behaviors and so on. And Joyce was also a major influence on Marshall McLuhan, as McLuhan always admitted. Every book McLuhan wrote, he talks about how much he learned from Joyce. And the whole McLuhan view of how media affect the mind. Finnegans Wake has a whole history of media in it, from sign language up to television, which didn't exist. That's another of the precognitions in Finnegans Wake. There's a television set in the bar, and there were no television sets in bars until about 8 years after Finnegans Wake was published, and no television sets in Irish bars till about 20 years later. And yet Joyce has a television set in the bar. But McLuhan got the whole idea of the global village and the effect of media on mind, and the evolution of mind reflected in and being fed back to by the evolution of media. All that's in Finnegans Wake. Joyce developed that out of Vico, the sociologist who studied how languages, how songs, in Vico's theory, songs led to languages, and languages led to law, and every law is really a dance that people have agreed to do without quite realizing how they got into it, because they're hypnotized by their language and they don't quite realize what they're doing, but they're going through this evolutionary pattern that's more intelligent than they are. It seems to be some kind of, Burroughs would call it a virus, Vico calls it divine providence. Some people think Vico was very sarcastic. He was writing while the Inquisition was still in full force.
Have you traced back to Vico anything? I mean, have you pursued his writings in the original?
Not in the original Italian, no, I don't have the language. But Vico has played a large role in my thinking because of his influence on Joyce. I wanted to understand Vico better, and it seems to me Vico was almost unintelligible for 200 years after he wrote, and it's only due to Joyce and the revolution in the social sciences in the 1960s caused by LSD. That's the great open secret in America. The popular myth is nobody took LSD but a bunch of hippies and Haight Ashbury, and they were all crazy. The fact is, according to my experience and travels, that everybody in the social sciences took LSD, and it vastly altered their theories of how mind operates and what society is. And LSD produced a very Joyce-like view, which you find in a lot of radical sociology, and especially in ethnomethodology. Garfinkel's books are very Joycean. The whole Garfinkel school of ethnomethodology leads right into Castaneda's work. Castaneda actually studied with Garfinkel, and Garfinkel was on Castaneda's PhD committee. So you got a very interesting chain from Vico to Joyce to Garfinkel by way of LSD to Carlos Castaneda to a lot of the current weirdness.
Well, what would you think would be the next move to make in the Finnegans Wake and the whole media thrust now? What would be a good project to pursue?
Well, the chap who directed my play, Wilhelm Reich in Hell, in Dublin, he and I have been discussing getting a bunch of Irish actors together and doing a reading of Finnegans Wake, and then blackmailing RTE into broadcasting it on the grounds we got the best actors in Ireland, and here it is, and Bloomsday is coming up. And so we have I don't know how long it would take to read Finnegans Wake aloud, but let's say approximately 30 hours. And with the best actors in Ireland doing it, anybody who survived would be in an altered state of consciousness by the end of the 30 hours.
Well, Ulysses took, 15 hours to read?
It took over 30 hours when they read it on RTE in 1982. That was a weird day. I'm walking around Dublin carrying a radio and listening to Bloom's thoughts. Each spot I'm going to, I'm running into other people carrying such radios. And then at 3 o'clock, a theatrical group did all the events that occurred at 3 o'clock in Dublin in 1904, and that's the chapter where Joyce emphasizes synchronicity most. He's got 19 events going on in 19 parts of Dublin, intercut with each other and all connected in weird Jungian ways. And they had actors all over Dublin doing these 19 scenes simultaneously, and people walking around with radios with the scene being read by other actors, and it was like Dublin had turned into Ulysses. You had the 7 sandwich board men walking with the letters on them, HELY''S, and S was always behind the others, just like in Joyce's book, and you didn't know whether you were in 1982 or 1904, or what was Joyce and what was reality.
Good.
That was a great day.
How could something like that be staged for Finnegans Wake? Make an event of this nature out of it.
Oh, I think it should be done on the radio. It's much. I think it works much better on the radio than on television. And with a group of 20 of Ireland's best actors taking turns reading the different roles, you got plenty of roles in Finnegans Wake, including group work. You got the quartet of the 4 old men, and you got the 12 signs of the zodiac, who are also the 12 members of the jury, who are also the 12 apostles, and you got the 7 rainbow girls. And it would practically be an opera. It probably would be an opera, even if they weren't trying to sing. There's so much music in it.
Well, I think that's a good spot for us to close in the opera of it all, and I want to tell you that you've really done a nice job for us to interpret what Joseph Campbell had to put out there in the key, and also for us to be a little bit more educated in Finnegans Wake and Joyce, since we're all sort of budding fans. And so thank you very much. Is there anything that you would like to say?
Yeah, I'd like to repeat again my favorite line from Joyce. What liberation is it to cast out the political tyranny of England and remain under the intellectual tyranny of Rome?